Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic today. Let's do it. People who have found secret rooms or closed-off areas in a house that you own. What do you think the previous owners were trying to hide? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe.
I was living in a top-floor studio apartment while attending college. My apartment had a back door that was screwed shut, sealed with tape, and painted over. One day, while returning home, I noticed that my apartment window wasn't actually right on the corner of the building, and there was apparently a considerable amount of hidden space behind the sealed door. I opened it up and found a narrow, unused staircase running the entire height of the building. It had doors to all the units below mine, and they all seemed sealed off in the same way mine was. At the basement level, there was an unlocked door leading to the basement, so I went through it. It opened into a small, unfinished basement room, absolutely stacked with 50 or 60 of those child-sized chair desk units that elementary schools use. I have no idea what was going on with that. There was a door out of that room into what I assume was the rest of the basement, but I couldn't get to it because of all the desks stacked up in the way. I went back to my apartment and realized there was no lock on my back door, so I got a bunch of boards and screws and boarded it up as permanently as possible. Working pest control had a few scenarios. One house had a former tunnel under it that went to the stream close by. It had been sealed off years before, but there was an obvious path to the boarded off and stoned over entrance. The owner was not sure, but assumed the house had been part of the Underground Railroad. One house had complaints of bats, went into attic and saw a hole in the floor of the attic. Could not find a hole in the ceiling of the home. Shimmied a piece of paneling next to the basement stairs and found a room behind it that had once been an 8x10 entry area. It had been bricked over on the outside, and I refused to enter in case there were any illicit items in the room. The people had lived in the home since 1972 and had no idea that room existed, and it had been walled up at least since then. This was 2022 when I discovered it. Went into a home complaining of noises in the attic area. The upstairs had 4 bedrooms. When you went behind the furnace, there was a small area next to it that had a door section that didn't outwardly appear as a door. When I opened that section and went behind it, there was a pathway of walkboards constructed that went all the way around the top floor, giving visual access through gaps in the trim and paneling to the bedrooms. The former owner was an eccentric shut-in, I was told. Last one. People purchased home again a bat issue. In the process of going into dormers where storage would normally be, I found a lockable panel in the master bedroom. Homeowners assumed it was for utilities. Opened panel and found a panic room set up. Internet and video cables, as well as lighting and the locking latch on the interior of the door. I was at these homes due to rodent or termite issues, and those aren't the craziest things I dealt with, just the hidden room ones. I actually enjoyed that job more than I realized. This isn't a particularly exciting story. My parents bought a house in the mid-90s from a couple who'd built a new house on the adjacent piece of property. The sellers were great people. She drove a school bus for our school, and he was a handyman, salt-of-the-earth people. Upon buying the house, which the previous owners had built on their own, we found a light switch in the living room upstairs that we couldn't figure out what it controlled. Years passed, and we just ignored it. About 10 years in, my dad needs to turn the furnace on in the winter. The house was 2 stories, and each had a fireplace, which we'd always used. And my dad cannot find the furnace anywhere. Somehow, the location of the furnace slipped by my folks during the purchase of the house, so he goes to the previous owner's house to ask. Turns out that under the front porch is a hidden room that houses the furnace. The wall to a basement bedroom was actually on a hinge, and you just pressed against it and it popped open to get you access to the furnace. And the light switch in the living room? It was to turn the furnace on or off. Not my own house, but the other my mother grew up in, an Underground Railroad station. Her parents owned an old farmhouse in the Hudson Valley of New York that had first been built around 200 years ago. Successive generations kept expanding the house until the 1940s. There was a hidden trapdoor in a barn with a secret basement room beneath. Previous owners had made their property a station on the Underground Railroad during the 1850s, at a time when people who were escaping slavery had to get to Canada to be free and safe. The owners during that era were risking a 10-year prison sentence for the help they gave. When Mom was a teenager, that trapdoor still functioned and the room could still be explored. Later owners decided to renovate and may have destroyed that bit of history. When the place was on the market a few years ago, I had a conversation with the real estate agent who hadn't known anything about that part of the property's history. I bought a duplex that had a crawl space that ran the length of the house. The door was screwed off with like 20 giant screws. Kind of made a chill run up my spine. So I'm sitting there in this little closet with tension building the whole time. Took a couple minutes to take them all out. The door was painted onto the trim, and I had to give it a little boost to break it free. The door fell to the ground, edit to the side. It had hinges all at once, and behind it was a little green guy about 4 feet tall with stitches going across his face, a Halloween scarecrow decoration. I threw the impact drill, fell over, and about shit myself all in one uncoordinated motion. The previous owner or tenant got me good. I'll find the picture. Give me a minute or two.
Well, there's some pretty cool stuff in some of these, some good history and some weird stuff as well, but nothing beats a good old prank right there. And that previous homeowner got you good. I like that.
A couple of years into the house with my ex-wife, I was in the garage, looked up, and noticed the outline of a door in a wood panel. I took a ladder, climbed up, and opened it. It was empty. I never told anyone in the family about it. Years later, my daughter asked me where I used to hide gifts in the old house, because for years, at Christmas and her birthday, she would look all around the house for her gifts. Of course, she never found them because she never looked up in the garage. Not my house, but my husband works in construction and once did a job where the homeowners built a secret entrance from the master bedroom to an underground room. They were insulating the underground room because the homeowners wanted it soundproof. We've always said that only two things that could be going on is sex or murder. Droughts mainly. I've been renovating an old cottage and found the old coal cellar underneath the bathroom when I took the floor up. Original ramp had been sealed off and covered by a later kitchen extension. Besides the 2-foot void top to bottom along one side with some creepy curtains and old wallpaper where the internal walls had been moved around. Tempting to put some witch marks or similar to mess with the next owner before I seal it up. When I was a teenager, one of my good friend's parents moved into a new house. It was a gorgeous century home with a neat dormer type upstairs. My friend, of course, took the dormer as his room. When we were moving his stuff in, we noticed a weird spot along the wall. It was wallpapered. We took a knife to it and discovered a little cubby. Inside were a few pair of women's gloves and glasses that looked to be maybe the 20s era. There were also a ton of letters. The letters were all love-type letters from many different men addressed to many different women that lived in the house. Turns out, it had once been a brothel, and they were letters from old Johns to their favorite gals. Real cool find. We bought an old farmhouse, which was traditionally a house-barn combo. Soon after the exterior, we noticed on the far end of an unpaned window up on the second floor, which didn't correspond to any known room inside. We then examined the nearby rooms from inside. Each has a door covered over. We uncovered the doors and revealed a space 7 feet by 30 feet wide open to the outside air. It must have been a barn loft they chose to not finish when they built those back rooms. So we closed off the window, added 2 volux for each bedroom extension, put a divider between them, and voila. Each bedroom has a generously sized office or walk-in closet. Another one, this time for my mother and stepfather. They bought their retirement home in a rural community. After the sale was agreed, the seller took them to the basement to show them a room that was not part of the official sale tour, his gun room. What looked to be homemade tool shelf was actually a door that opened into a separate room in which he stored his hunting paraphernalia. He said the neighbors knew that he hunted and that he would occasionally do target practice on the property. But no one minded because they never complained. Once my parents moved in, they asked the neighbors about it, who said yes, they were all well aware of it, and the target practice in the early hours of the weekend annoyed them, but they weren't about to confront an armed neighbor about it. The room, being in the basement, was used by my parents for some storage, but most notably as their wine cellar, as it stayed cool year-round. We still call it the gun room, though, when someone has to fetch something from it. Found one in my previous house. Looks like they refinished the attic and added a short wall instead of just letting the rafters run at an angle down to the floor, and then added a screwed shut door or cover to access it. There was only a half a dozen old paint cans in there. There was another one on the far side of the room that was bigger and had a light switch and bulb in there, but it was empty. Guessing they used it for storage at one point, but not sure why they had the cover screwed on. I added hinges and put our holiday decorations in there. Not me, but a cousin. Bought an old farmhouse that the layout seemed funny on the second floor. Between two rooms with gables, there were two latch doors with a narrow closet space from one to the other about 4.5 feet high and maybe 2 feet wide, about 15 feet long, but reasonably from the outside that whole length should have been available space. So they knocked out the wall in that closet space. It opened up into an empty room with no windows. The walls and ceilings were finished, but the floor wasn't, with tons of outlets and nail holes in the ceiling and wall. Otherwise, nobody could figure out what was wrong with the space. I was a teen and expecting crazy stuff, or like a secret hidden child room, but it was just plain empty. It took me years to realize it was probably a hidden grow room. I lived in a house with a built-in shelf and clothes hamper in the bathroom, original to the house. The trim around it was door-sized for reference. We decided to replace it all at one point and found a closet behind it that was about 3 times the volume of the built-in structure. The layout of the house masked the extra missing space, so we never noticed it before. Not as cool as some of these, but an interesting look at an odd construction shortcut. I grew up in an old homestead built in the pioneering times. It had a blocked-off room upstairs. It used to be the maid quarters, accessed by a drop-down ladder. The ladder was eventually removed and the trap door in the roof covered, meaning the only way in was through a second-story window. I think it might have been blocked off by my grandparents, who purchased the house in the 1940s. They would have blocked it off because it was in bad repair and the house was massive. As a child, we used to love exploring that room. Not only because it required an extension ladder, but the walls were covered with newspaper jokes and comics from World War II. During that period, the house was used as an officer's mess for trainee pilots, and they obviously done some decorating. My parents eventually installed a door and renovated the room. Most of the newspaper clippings got destroyed by insects and decay. We moved out of this house when I was 2, so I have no memory of it. According to my folks, there was a door leading downstairs, not to the basement though, that was kept locked, and the people who owned the house told my parents to never touch that door or try to get through it. The 3rd floor of the house had a room with a coffin in it that they were also told not to touch. I have no idea if there was anything in the coffin or not. The house was old, predated the American Civil War, and a skirmish had been fought nearby. My brother dug mini balls out of the side of the house in 1981. I wish I could go back, but the people that we rented it from sold it to someone else. I was house hunting with my realtor, who was also a good friend of mine, a few years ago. We looked at a house that had a fully fenced yard and a massive flagpole in the front yard. It had 2 bedrooms with closets in between that connected, which we thought was very strange because it was built like there should have been a partition separating the 2 closets, but there wasn't. There were no locks on the closet, so you could easily just walk into someone's room through the closet if the door was locked. Attached to the back bedroom was a very small room, about 5 feet by 10 feet, like a small laundry room that had an access door to the backyard, but that door was padlocked from the inside, so it couldn't be opened. The bedroom door also had locks to the laundry room. There was also a small rectangular hole cut in the wall between the bedroom and the laundry room, about the size of a dinner tray. It really seemed like this house had been used for human trafficking, and my realtor friend agreed. We both got pretty creeped out. I ended up buying a house about a mile away, and I often wonder if the new owner is hiding someone in that small room. I lived in a student co-op that was two Victorian houses that had been connected on the ground floor to make one giant house. When you went down to the basement level, you could turn right into the TV room, which was connected to a rec room and laundry room, House A's basement. If you turned left, you'd go into the large kitchen and dining room and then the workshop maintenance room, House B's basement. If you went into the workshop, then behind the furnace, there was a small door hidden in the wood paneling. It opened into a bedroom-sized room with a dirt floor with shelves and power outlets around the walls and light fixtures. This was at one point the grow room, and was not on the blueprints, as it was not part of either the original house, but instead under where the houses were connected.